There is no Hollywood script in this story, no mysterious masks, and no loud gunfire, but there is a woman whose name is now known throughout the country. It all began with ordinary meetings, confidential conversations, and promises of help, and it ended with sudden deaths. How did she manage to go unnoticed for so many years? And why didn't anyone suspect anything earlier? It is a story in which each new fact is more shocking than the last. Stay until the end, as you will not believe how far it went. The story we are talking about today is not just frightening, it is terrifying because of how ordinary everything was. It is not a movie, nor is it a fabrication. Ordinary people, such as relatives, friends, and colleagues, disappeared or died one after another, and no one connected these events until it was too late. We will examine in detail how Sararat Rangsiwuthaporn, smiling and silent, became the focus of a series of poisonings. It all began around 10 or 11 a.m. A woman went down to the river to release fish into the water. This is a traditional custom in Thailand, believed to bring good luck and prosperity. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. The woman suddenly fell to the ground. Passers-by immediately rushed to her aid and found her unconscious. They immediately called an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived and began resuscitation, it was already too late. The woman had died. Doctors suspected the cause of death was acute cardiopulmonary failure, likely caused by accidental circumstances. The deceased was identified as Siraporn Khan Wong, also known as Koi. She was 32 years old and a successful entrepreneur from Kanchanaburi province. However, her parents were convinced that her mysterious death was no accident, as she had no underlying health problems. Furthermore, several valuable items were discovered missing after her death, including cash, 2 smartphones, an iPhone 14 Pro Max, an Oppo, her wallet, and her car. These circumstances raised serious doubts about the true cause of her death. At the parents' urging, the authorities launched a more thorough investigation. Upon reviewing surveillance camera footage from near the scene, it became clear that Koi had come to the river with her friend Sararat Rangsiwuthaporn. Both women had come to release fish into the river. Initially, they walked together but then separated. Koi walked toward the river, while Sararat crossed the street. The video shows Sararat standing and looking toward the river, appearing to search for something. After pacing back and forth for a bit, she seems to ask someone a question. She appears confused and points in another direction. She then walks to the end of the path and again displays strange and confused behavior, which is especially odd considering she arrived with a friend. The cameras then filmed her running to the car, taking out an object, and going down the stairs to the river where Koi was. After a short time, however, she returned, got into the car, and drove away as if nothing had happened. To describe this behavior as strange would be an understatement. According to Koi's family, she and Sararat were supposed to release the fish together. So why did Sararat leave when Koi lost consciousness? Why didn't she stay to help her friend? Why didn't she call for help? Such questions were undoubtedly on her relatives' minds. Later, the police found Koi's car at an acquaintance's house. According to surveillance camera recordings, Koi first drove to Sararat's house, from where Sararat drove them both to the river. However, other missing items belonging to Koi, including her cash, smartphones, and wallet, were never found. During her interview with the police, Sararat initially denied her involvement in the incident and insisted that she had not been at the riverbank that day. However, after being shown the surveillance camera footage, she changed her story and admitted that she had indeed been at the scene. She explained her sudden disappearance by claiming that urgent matters had arisen, requiring her immediate departure. Sararat stated that she had noticed Koi's health deteriorating, but since other people were already there to help, she decided that her friend was fine and did not need her assistance. Regarding the missing items, it later emerged that Sararat had mailed them to one of her acquaintances. The package was sent on April 19, and inside were Koi's wallet, her Oppo phone, and her handbag. The remaining items were never found. However, almost no one believed this story, especially Rapi Chamnanrua. He played a key role in uncovering the truth about Sararat's actions. From the moment he saw the CCTV footage, he felt something was wrong. But even he could not imagine how deep this story truly ran. If Sararat was truly responsible for Koi's death, how did she do it? Poisoning seemed the most likely method. However, the initial toxicology analysis revealed no traces of poison in Koi's body. The woman's mysterious death quickly became the main topic in the news and sparked widespread public outrage. Soon, the phones in newsrooms and police stations began ringing non-stop. People reported that their close friends and relatives also knew Sararat and had died under mysterious circumstances after meeting her. One detail was particularly disturbing. Many of the victims were found to have darkened fingernails at the time of their deaths. From 2020 to 2023, there were at least 15 such victims. Yes, no fewer than 15 victims in just 3 years. If Sararat was truly involved in all these deaths, how did she manage to avoid suspicion and elude the police for so long? Sararat was arrested, and the news of this case immediately spread throughout the country. People began to actively discuss who else might have been her victim. Soon, another woman came forward. She claimed to have lent Sararat 250,000 baht, approximately $7,700. According to her, Sararat offered her a pill when they met at a mall. After taking it, the woman felt severe pressure in her chest and numbness in her hands. Fortunately, she was taken to the hospital in time, and her life was saved. Let's take a closer look at who Sararat actually is. At the time of her arrest, she was 36 years old. Her ex-husband, Vitun Rangsuithaporn, worked for the police. After their wedding, the couple moved into police housing, where they had 2 children. Over time, Vitun advanced in his career and rose to the rank of police lieutenant colonel, which secured a higher standard of living for the family, allowing them to move into a new house. Despite their eventual divorce, Sararat and Vitun maintained a close relationship, likely for the sake of their children. It is unknown exactly when Sararat developed her propensity for murder, but among the alleged victims was reportedly her latest lover. In Sararat's life, deaths under unexplained circumstances occurred with suspicious frequency. One of these cases was her boyfriend Suthisak De Phungkwan. He died under suspicious circumstances on March 12, 2023, just a month before Koi's mysterious death. The pathologist listed the cause of his death as acute cardiopulmonary failure. It was Sararat who called the police, presenting herself as his girlfriend and claiming to be pregnant with his child. At the time, nothing seemed strange to anyone. Later, however, it emerged that Sararat was celebrating her birthday with friends on the evening Day died. No one in their right mind would do something like that immediately after the death of a loved one. On March 18, 2023, just days after his death, Sararat pawned Day's gold jewelry and took control of all his assets. At that time, this did not seem unusual to Day's family. They were convinced that Sararat was indeed expecting his child and, as the mother of his future heir, was entitled to his entire fortune. However, a close friend of Day's who wished to remain anonymous immediately began to suspect that things were not so simple. He found it particularly alarming that Sararat quickly packed up all of Day's personal belongings from his room and moved them away, leaving the room completely empty. The media spoke to this man, whom we will call Mr. Kung. He had known Day since childhood and was convinced that the child Sararat was expecting was actually his friend's. According to him, Day met Sararat in December 2022 through a dating app. Sararat often boasted about using micro-loans to pawn cars and real estate, as well as her involvement in stock trading. She also emphasized several times that her ex-husband held a high position in the police force, assuring everyone that he would take care of any problems that arose. Mayday's girlfriend remembers the day he first introduced Sararat. That was on March 11. When she returned from work, she saw Day sitting on a marble bench in front of their house with a woman. At first, she didn't know who it was, but then she remembered Day mentioning that his new female friend was coming over that day. May noticed that Day was behaving unusually. He was serious and quiet, completely different from his usual self. While they sat on the bench, Sararat did most of the talking. She asked him what he used to do and if he had other women. After the visit, they left together. On the day of his death, Sararat called May and said that something was wrong with Day, claiming he was bleeding heavily. When May arrived, other people were already in the room, including Sararat. All of this happened before the police arrived. Day was lying on the bed, wearing only his underwear, with blood on his lips. May noticed that his fingernails were dark, but his body was still warm. At that moment, she thought Day might be under the influence of illegal substances or, as is sometimes believed in Thailand, the victim of witchcraft. May also noticed that Day usually carried a lot of cash, but on the day of his death, there were fewer than 10 baht in his pockets. After Day's death, some of his relatives recalled that he had once told a story about witnessing a murder committed by Sararat. He had called her a cruel woman. This further aroused their suspicions, and they decided to search his apartment thoroughly. They made a horrific discovery, a bottle labeled UN 1680, which is potassium cyanide. Potassium cyanide is an extremely toxic substance that can cause death within minutes of ingestion. It is odorless and tasteless, meaning it can be mixed unnoticed into food or drinks. The victim is usually unaware of the poisoning until it is too late. Symptoms appear quickly and include breathing difficulties, confusion, and unconsciousness. Depending on the dose and method of ingestion, it can lead to death in as little as 15 minutes. Detecting the presence of cyanide in the body requires special laboratory tests of blood and tissue for cyanide ions or their metabolites, which significantly complicates the investigation of suspicious deaths. In Thailand, cyanide is primarily used in the mining industry to extract gold and silver. Although the use of cyanide is strictly regulated, it can still be found in certain types of pesticides and fumigants. Forensic experts were able to detect traces of cyanide in the car that Sararat had shared with her ex-husband. The police subsequently obtained a search warrant for her ex-husband's home, where they found a large quantity of unidentified medications and empty capsules. The ex-husband claimed he had no idea where they came from. Similar items were also found at Sararat's mother's home. All of the suspicious substances found were later identified as cyanide. In May 2023, the Provincial Police Department in Ratchaburi presented the results of the autopsy on Koi's body. The report confirmed that cyanide had indeed been found in her system. Afterwards, Sararat refused to comment on Koi's death. Upon her arrest, she made a truly outrageous statement. She claimed that Koi herself had wanted to take illegal substances laced with cyanide, and she had merely helped her fulfill that wish. She also claimed to have received the cyanide from her deceased boyfriend. Honestly, it is almost impossible to make this stuff up. What this woman said is beyond absurd. One gets the impression that she thinks the whole world is absolutely naive if she expects anyone to believe these ridiculous justifications. So many people around her were dying from cyanide poisoning, and in her opinion, all of it was pure coincidence. She acted as if cyanide were the most common substance on the planet, which is simply incomprehensible. The police carefully investigated all the fatalities and established a connection between them. Each of the victims had some sort of connection with Sararat, primarily through financial relationships. What is truly astonishing is that even police officers were among the victims. They likely met Sararat through her ex-husband's connections. If even police officers could not escape danger, who could feel safe? Sararat spared no one, not even her school friends. This meant that anyone who interacted with her could potentially become a victim. One of her fraud schemes involved participation in a Rosca savings group. This is a system in which participants regularly contribute a fixed amount of money to a common fund which is then distributed in full to one of the participants each time until everyone has received their share. The entire system is based on trust and is interest-free. It is an affordable alternative to traditional loans, especially in Southeast Asia, where such groups are popular for saving money for large purchases or unforeseen expenses. You could say it is a kind of people's bank where individuals help one another. While the Rosca scheme was the basis for many of her scams, Sararat also used other financial tricks that essentially amounted to the same thing. The victims simply did not live long enough to profit from them. For example, she borrowed money from people at high interest rates. The terms seemed advantageous for the lender, provided they lived long enough to be repaid. She also ran schemes involving shadow lending and gambling. In all of these operations, Sararat appropriated the money and then disappeared without a trace, moving on to another unsuspecting victim. One might think she was targeting wealthy people, but the opposite was true. Sararat sought out those in desperate financial straits. She seemed to unerringly sense which fraud scheme would work best on a particular individual to maximize her own profit. Often, she extracted much more money from her victims than they actually had. This is exactly what happened to one of her victims, Nitya. Her tragic story unfolded in August 2020. Nitya owned a Honda Civic, which she pawned on Sararat's advice. They went out for drinks together that evening. Shortly afterward, Nitya was found unconscious face down in a bathroom. Her face was darkly discolored. Doctors at the time ruled that her death was due to cardiopulmonary failure, and her family had no idea that anything was wrong. At that point, Nitya had known Sararat for about 3 to 4 months, having met her through the Rosca group. What truly shocked the family was this. Shortly after the funeral, they received a call informing them that Nitya's car had indeed been pawned. The family members were completely stunned. They had no idea where the money was, who had received it, or why this had all happened. The most painful part, however, was that many families who fell into such a trap had to pay additional sums just to get the deceased's property, such as their cars, back. Ultimately, these families lost not only a loved one but also their money and their hope for justice. In reality, the money was with Sararat, who had defrauded the victims in advance and convinced them to hand over the cash for safekeeping. Sararat acted so quickly to eliminate her targets that their families could not even grasp what was happening in time. Naturally, Sararat then disappeared with the money. This is exactly how most of her scams worked, and the pattern was repeated over and over again. Furthermore, in some cases, the families of Sararat's victims could not afford to buy back the pawned cars, which allowed Sararat to keep the vehicles for herself, causing additional emotional pain to the deceased's relatives. The most heinous part, however, was that Sararat even hired a lawyer to demand additional payments from the victims' families, further exacerbating their financial problems. One has to wonder if her lawyer was knowingly involved in these scams or simply turned a blind eye to make easy money. Sararat committed the murders in the following way. She would invite the victim to a religious ceremony, to see a fortune teller, or to have lunch at a temple. When they met, Sararat offered them food or drinks laced with cyanide. It is even said that during the pandemic, she distributed diet pills containing cyanide. This is truly frightening, and it makes you think twice before drinking coffee made by a friend. The police continue to investigate the victims who died from cyanide poisoning. For example, one woman died on April 1, 2023. CCTV cameras recorded Sararat sitting next to a police officer named Nipa in a temple that day. Nipa gave Sararat money, and Sararat invited her to see a fortune teller. What happened next, unfortunately, cannot be shown on YouTube because it is entirely restricted content. Investigators were determined to find out where Sararat had obtained the cyanide. To everyone's surprise, they discovered that it was being sold in a shop in central Bangkok. In fact, the shop in question had sold more than 1,500 bottles of cyanide, and it became clear that this lethal substance could easily be purchased online. The disturbing question arises: how many similar poisoners could be hiding in Thailand? After all, there have been previous cases of cyanide poisoning in this country. One of the methods Sararat used to earn money was through life insurance. The victim would take out an insurance policy that served as collateral in case they could not repay their debts. However, in the event of the insured's death, Sararat would become the beneficiary, meaning the death had to look natural. Cyanide fit this plan perfectly. If toxicologists did not specifically look for traces of cyanide in the deceased's body, the death would appear natural. In this way, Sararat calmly received one insurance payout after another. According to investigators' estimates, Sararat was able to swindle hundreds of thousands of dollars through these and other schemes. The police discovered 108 bank accounts with a total of 78 million baht, approximately $2.4 million. She could have become even richer, but rumors suggest she gambled away much of the money. Of course, she cannot be called a victim, as all of her money is literally stained with blood. The police chief stated that the deceased Koi's assets had been pawned in a pawnshop under Sararat's name, which became one of the most important pieces of evidence against her. Upon her arrest, she refused to admit her guilt. Her former husband and her lawyer were also arrested. However, the court later released the lawyer because no direct evidence of his involvement in Sararat's crimes was found. At the time of her arrest, Sararat was 4 months pregnant, but after several months in prison, she suffered a miscarriage. The reaction on social media was brutal, with some writing that she deserved it. Public opinion was extremely hostile, as many of her victims were their family's primary breadwinners, and one of them had recently become a mother. According to the investigation, Sararat had been defrauding and killing people since 2015, remaining uncaught for years. It is suspected that after one of her first victims, a woman named Munthathip Sai Kowin, she developed a taste for killing and recognized the massive potential for profit. Sararat had offered to look after Sai's property while she was abroad. When Sai returned to Thailand, Sararat personally picked her up from the airport and brought her home. The next day, Sai was found dead. After her death, Sararat sold Sai's house and appropriated the money. Research shows that female killers usually act for financial gain, while men are more likely to be driven by cruelty or dark fantasies. However, the sheer number of her victims, regardless of her motives, puts Sararat on a par with the world's most notorious serial killers. Finally, in November 2024, Sararat Rangsuithaporn was found guilty of Koi's murder in the first of 14 trials and was sentenced to death. Meanwhile, her ex-husband was sentenced to 16 months in prison for destroying evidence and aiding Sararat's escape. The death penalty is the sentence for just one of the 14 murders. But even now, after so many deaths and months of investigation, questions remain. Who helped her, and how many more people could have been her victims? What does a person feel who is capable of killing again and again, calmly and without fear? Sararat remains silent, but her actions speak for themselves, and more trials and verdicts are still to come. This story is not over yet. Thailand is still recovering from the extent of this toxic web. Life, a woman, and poison were all dissolved in
Schrecklichste an dieser
trust.
Geschichte ist vielleicht,
Perhaps the most
wie leicht sich der
horrifying thing
Tod hinter
about
einem
this
Lächeln
story
und einer
is how
Tasse Kaffee
easily
versteckt.
death hid behind a smile and a cup of coffee. How often do we look at the people around us and fail to see their true faces? Thanks for watching, and stay safe.